Back here on New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Bobby C here on One, and I'm thrilled to be joined by author Michael E. Sawyer, who just dropped the newest book on Lewis Hamilton. Michael, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and congratulations on the book.
Hey, Bobby, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
I think that this book, you've touted it as the definitive biography on Lewis Hamilton, and in my mind, he is the greatest driver of all time. I know that you feel the same. What made you decide to tackle this as a subject matter about this book?
Yeah, I think part of it is just what you're saying, right? I think it was time in his career to do a careful look at everything that had gone on, right? From like the very beginning until the point where the book kind of ends with him leaving Mercedes and headed for Ferrari, to give us all a chance to kind of enjoy really what had happened, right? Because you know how in sports, right, you can get so wrapped up in a single season or a single event that you miss the whole thing. So I wanted to capture that while it was still going on, because now we can take a pause and then be ready to watch what happens next with Ferrari. So I think it gives us a good place to think about just the career trajectory so far.
And you decided to dedicate this book to your parents. And I think it's great that you speak about how they taught you not only about sports, but that heroes aren't just about statistics. And I think Lewis Hamilton really is someone that really speaks to such great volumes about that, because his parents, of course, played such a pivotal role in helping him become arguably, again, the greatest F1 driver of all time.
Yeah, I think the book has a lot of layers to it, and one of them is about parenthood and what it means to have a child who has serious ambition, right? I mean, and I don't think this is limited to sports. I don't care whether it's a kid who wants to be a great math teacher, right? Just how parents are there to kind of teach and give support where necessary. So I think Lewis's story is really one that shows that, right? Because his parents and his dad gets a ton of attention, but it's also his mom, stepmom, his brother, his kind of close knit family really got behind this effort. And I think it really shows. And, my parents, as I mentioned, I grew up in the 70s in Chicago. So Ali was, my hero for my entire life. And I remember my dad taking me to see Ali's fight against Larry Holmes on closed circuit TV. And I cried for like 2 days after that, right? And it was that, and, I try to look back at that and remember that Ali's career was more than just that one fight, right? And so it took me a long time to get over that. So I think it's important for sports fans and for just people who are interested in Lewis period to kind of take a moment and just enjoy the career that we've seen and be glad to have been able to watch it as it's happened.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, nowadays he's compared obviously to other drivers in let's say, in the twilight of their career. But, he just comes out in this Time magazine article and speaks about how he would like to race and can see himself racing into the age of 50. And, when you look at someone like Michael Schumacher, who, of course, he's tied with the 7 championships, and you could make a case that he really already has 8 championships. I think, the way that he has performed the last couple of years, Mercedes, of course, down, he doesn't look like he's lost a step as a driver.
No, I think, for any athlete, it's a race between what you know about the sport and what you can produce, physically, right? And I think Lewis is in a very good position now where he knows so much, can still, to your point, still can pull it together when he has the right equipment. Because Mercedes just didn't have a car to deliver to him since 2021 that he needed to be as competitive. But I think what we saw last year at Silverstone showed that he still can,
Be
produce the
fast.
magic necessary. Yeah, be as fast as he needs to be. We saw flashes of it, right, a couple of times, and some missteps on the part of the team that I think the team took responsibility for. So I was excited about what I saw last week with testing with Ferrari. So I think we're in a position to see some more excitement from Lewis. I don't think, to your point, I don't think he's done yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you compare him to other great legendary athletes, and he even said, "Don't compare me to anyone else." But I think if you were to probably compare him to someone, let's say, at that age in their respective sport and the impact that they've also had as a cultural icon, to me, he's more Michael Jordan in the twilight than he would be some of these other famous race car drivers that never won again in Formula One,
Yeah, I
like
think that.
Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm from Chicago, so Michael Jordan always means a lot to me, right? But I think, to your point, right, Lewis is one of these drivers who will look back, and part of his story will be the drivers who didn't win championships that probably would have if he hadn't been in the sport. So same thing for basketball. You think about Barkley, you think about Ewing, these
Yeah.
people who aren't able to get around this kind of immovable object, right? So Lewis, I think Fernando Alonso probably would have won more championships if not for Lewis. I think certainly Nico Rosberg would probably have won more championships if not for Lewis. So I think he's that type of figure. So I think you're right to compare him to Jordan.
And over the years, especially with being able to do the show and having so many great guests on, I became friends with Willie T. Ribbs, who's the first black driver to not only test an F1 car, but then also race and complete the race in the Indy 500. And he says the same thing all the time. Like, this idea that Lewis Hamilton is in a class all his own because of all of the challenges, not just as a driver, but then also the racism that he's had to endure in the sport. And to me, it's remarkable, Michael, that to this day, you still only have one black driver in the sport.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Formula One is such a difficult uh, place to get to, right? It's like, because I think in most countries we have such an evolved system that allows access, right? So you think about the way football operates in any major sport in this country, right? There are kind of clear paths that really have become clear and also have reduced just the expense of getting there, right? So we think about Formula One, you're talking about 20 seats in the whole sport. You're thinking about, the from the United States, there's really no series to get into. So you've got to get over to Europe to participate in it. And in this country particularly, and I think Ribs is a good exemplar of this, right? Like he was groundbreaking in what he was up to, and I think Lewis took that, has extended that in ways that we can hardly imagine. But yeah, it'll be, and if there are more drivers of color or women drivers, much of that will be because of Lewis's efforts, I think.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a very exciting time. I mean, I was always a Ferrari fan, but became a Mercedes fan because I am such a big Lewis Hamilton fan. And then, of course, being such a big Formula One fan like yourself, you talk about the greats. And I think to myself that I believe that Lewis is in that special category because, again, if you were to compare other sports, for example, you think about the pioneers of the game. I'm going to go with, let's say, someone like Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, of course, one of the greatest players of all time, but maybe his accomplishments should be so much more revered and put into perspective because of what he had to deal with, in addition to trying to be a great player. And I've heard some other analysts sometimes talk about some of the legendary players that way, someone like a Jackie Robinson, that you might have to put more emphasis on what they had to endure just to be as great as they were, to be in that conversation with the greats of the game. And I think if you look at Lewis Hamilton's career, I know some people will go out there and they'll say Senna or they'll say Schumacher,
Sure.
but I think what he's accomplished, just even to put himself in the same situation, knowing, like you said, with the socioeconomics of the sport, the fact that his both of his parents had to make such sacrifices for him to go from remote control cars to karting and then to eventually make it as an F1 driver. I mean, I think his career is very much like that of a movie magic. I mean, I should do a film about him. I know right now he's working on the new F1 movie, but Lewis Hamilton's story is just remarkable. And you capture all of that in this book. What made you decide to drop it now? I mean, did it have some of that have to do with the move to Ferrari?
So when we started putting the book together, we had no idea the move to Ferrari was going to happen, right? Because you know how this goes with like the writing process. And Lewis is one of these people where it's difficult to even think about writing a biography because every day he's doing something new, right? It's like literally you can hardly keep up. Like last week it was Lululemon, next week it'll be whatever happens with Ferrari. So we literally got really lucky with as the book was coming together. I was still working on it, and then the announcement came about Ferrari, so it gave us an opportunity to really bracket his career because, from my perspective, I thought after 2021, I would not have been mad if Lewis Hamilton had walked away from the sport after that. With that type of outrage that surrounded not just a bad decision for him, but I think a bad decision for sports generally, right? That where a victory is taken away in that fashion from an athlete. So I was at that point, I was prepared to say, you know what, this is something we should really think about and start writing about this person's career because we don't know what's going to happen next. And in the writing, I just got fortunate with this timing. So it works out. This book kind of brackets his Mercedes journey with Mercedes powerful with McLaren and all the way through the Mercedes part. Now there's a point to pause, and then you can start thinking about what happens with Ferrari and the Tifosi in Italy.
I think it's only more recently too that so many people here in the United States have taken an interest in Formula One. A lot of that, of course, has to do with Drive to Survive, and I think the pandemic too put some light on some sports that might not have been as popular here in the U.S. Maybe people had more time to start to take some interest. But Lewis Hamilton might actually be the one driver that maybe people outside of the interest in the sport might actually know. I think it's cool that obviously early in the book you lead with some of the things that he's done outside of the sport, whether it's the Met Gala. And I think here in New York, he might be someone that people recognize, even if they don't know him as a driver.
Yeah, I think that's right. You can see this in the marketing because the Lululemon line that he's supporting came out last week, and there's no reference at all to cars in the entire ad, right? It's just, same thing with Momoa luggage, the same, he's in that way he's transcended the sport where he's a brand unto himself. And, he's one of these people who just has, whatever you want to call it, right? He's got charisma, Q factor, whatever. He's got that. And I mentioned in the book how you can see it from a very early age, literally that first commercial event of him on a children's television show, right? Driving a remote control car. He's got it all together at that point, right? So yeah, I think that shows, and I think you're right, right? Netflix and then the pandemic and social media, it all kind of comes together at a time when you have an athlete who can be elevated in that way. So I think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating technology and media story as well as a story about an athlete.
We're joined here now on one with author Michael Sawyer, who's also a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. How much did that role that you have outside of writing really help you, especially considering what you teach at the University of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, no, it's complicated because I'm a literature professor, so I do a lot of reading other people's work and commenting on it, right? So, as you're writing, you're trying to figure out how this fits into a larger kind of conversation, right? So there are a lot of, sports are, in like I mentioned in the introduction, right? Or the dedication, sports have been around my life forever. So I have a series of kind of writers that have written on sports that I really wanted to pay homage to in this as well. Like from Pittsburgh, John Edgar Wideman, who actually was one of my professors in grad school, wrote a wonderful book about basketball, just the way basketball fits into his life. I think others like Pat Conroy's book, My Losing Season, was inspirational. Obviously, you have Hemingway's Death in the Afternoon. These are important kind of sports books that I think use sports as a point of departure to talk about other things. So really what I wanted to do is, in similar fashion what Lewis is doing, take Formula One and then be able to show how it relates or how he relates it to all these other things. So, it's a tough book to write from that perspective because Formula One fans don't want you to kind of explain how qualifying happens, but you kind of have to give an on-ramp to people who were there, who know Lewis from the Met Gala or who know about, other his social justice activities, et cetera, who want to embrace the sport and learn a little bit more about it, even as they're watching something like Drive to Survive.
When all the things were happening, obviously with Taylor and George Floyd, and how Lewis was able to really use the platform, as you said, for Formula One. I mean, as it was unfolding, were you impressed just by what he was able to accomplish in a short period of time? I mean, now, of course, with the initiative as well, too. I mean, he's really done a lot to try to make inroads in a very quick amount of time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Lewis gives us an opportunity to think differently about activism, right? Because, as I mentioned, I grew up, post 60s, 70s, where activism was exemplified by Ali, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, these kind of athletes who, Arthur Ashe, who kind of took a stance, but information flowed a lot more slowly, right? It took forever, write a letter, write a newspaper article, etc. But Lewis arrives in this kind of digital age, and he basically gets informed about what happened with Breonna Taylor by Naomi Osaka's effort, where she had started wearing, I think she was wearing a mask that said something about, the death of Breonna Taylor, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and he adopts that, right? So much of that is a technology story, and then he's also advocating from the very top of the sport, right? So if you think about Kaepernick, as much as we know about him making it to the Super Bowl, when he started his protest, he was not at that level of play at the time. So Lewis was doing this from the very front of the grid, right? It's like the premier driver. So it set the tone for an entire sport. And again, one in which there's no one else who looks like him, anywhere, except for maybe the one person who just retired who was the mechanic at Red Bull, right? There were no black faces around the sport, very few. So he was really, and he's in Europe and caring about something that's happening in the United States. So it shows the kind of the range that he has and the ability to focus on more than one thing at a time.
And then I guess just in closing, Michael, what are you hoping to accomplish with the book? I mean, I think, like I said, you've done such a wonderful job of balancing a lot of the content between Formula One stuff for the fans that are just into racing, but then again about speaking about much bigger things that go outside of racing and using Lewis Hamilton's incredible story to really tell that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that the book gives us a chance to celebrate an athlete while we still have them to celebrate. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's, we had this kind of "what have you done for me lately" attitude with athletes sometimes. I really think if you think about an athlete like LeBron James, even right, the kind of critiques of him that sometimes ignore like the kind of long journey of this person's career. I hope that this book gives us a chance to kind of pause and think about that, and also take in all these other things. And now, as we watch these last moments of his career, however long it takes, and we can do it informed by everything that happened before.
Well, it's a great read, and congratulations again on the book. It's available at all major retailers from Legacy Books, Sir Lewis by Michael Sawyer. Thanks so
Thanks a
much.
lot. Thanks.